Good afternoon. It's an extraordinary pleasure, and I really mean extraordinary pleasure, for me to leave the administration building for a couple of hours and come over here to the saner side of the campus where faculty do their work and achieve extraordinary um, successes in scholarship, teaching, and service, and help to run this university in a way that powers us all. I'm, for anyone who doesn't know, I'm Emily McDermott. I'm the interim provost and vice chancellor for academic affairs. I'm happy to be here to introduce the superstars of the day. And with that said, let me start by introducing our first speaker, Crystal Schaaf, who's one of our top researchers in the School for the Environment and in the university as a whole, as a matter of fact. And I'd love to bring her forward to give you her talk.
Well, thank you all for coming on such a beautiful day, and we even had to pull the shades, which is very sad because it's really pretty out there. School for the Environment, we like looking out at the environment a lot. So the title of my talk is Land Remote Sensing Research in the School for the Environment. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm originally trained as a meteorologist. I spent 14 years in uniform and as a civil servant out at the Air Force's Geophysics Lab in Hanscom in Bedford nearby. And then I got my PhD from BU, and then I went to BU as a research professor for another 14 years. I'm kind of like psychads, I'm in some sort of a cycle. And in 2011, I came here to UMass Boston. I was recruited to bring my program, my research program here to the only public research university in Boston, which at the time I went, really? And then I thought, oh yeah, Tufts, Harvard. I'm like, yeah, you're right. So, and the first person I met outside of my SFE recruiting group was Rajani Srikanth from over there, from the Honors College, and she came up to me and she said, you're gonna love our students. You're gonna be beguiled by them. And she's absolutely right. The students are, I taught at BU, they're great kids. I graduated a bunch, but they don't want it quite as much as the UMass Boston kids. And they are just beguiling and delightful. So, move right into the Sfe PhD students that have been under my care since 2011. I was lucky enough to inherit one that needed finishing out because her advisor had left, which was Yun Yang. She now works for the U.S. Department of Agriculture down in Beltsville in Maryland. A strong researcher bringing in her own grants in her own right. Ian Painter, who's currently at NASA Goddard and Universities Research Association, also in Maryland. Yan Liu, who has gone home to her home country and works at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Sadly, she is under quarantine, of course, since she's in Beijing. Edward Hines, who is sort of a special case in many ways because he's a UMass Boston undergrad. He was in my first ever class. I taught here at UMass Boston in my obstreperous back row. And he's a first-generation American, and he ended up with a NASA scholarship and now works for Spectral Evolution, which builds hyperspectral instruments in the Boston area. Shabna Brouani just took a job with Mass GIS. She is also astonishing in having gotten a green card as originally an Iranian citizen, so that was a relief. And my latest one that just defended last Friday, Peter Boucher, who's sitting here on the end, who defended in flying colors. And then we have Angela, who's my current graduate student, who's working away. And 9 other doctoral students from BU, who all are very dear to my heart. And we couldn't do all of this without postdoctoral research fellows. Again, I've been very, very lucky. I have 2 fabulous ones right now, Dr. Arthur Elms and Dr. Charlotte Levy. And I have 3 others that are now, 2 have moved on to NASA, and 1 is doing a stint in Germany, having a marvelous time in Berlin, although I guess he's probably worried whether he can't move around too much either. So what I do is I work primarily with satellite sensors. I work with sensors that look at the land part of the environment. We have another member of our faculty who looks more at the ocean, Xiangpei Li. But I work on the terrestrial side. When I first came, I said, gee, you know, guys, I'm not really that good at oceans and shorelines. And the dean at that point, Robin, patted me on the head and said, never mind, I consider everything from the continental divide down to be the coast. It's like, okay, I can work with that. So the satellites that I work on, the MODIS satellite, which is on the MODIS sensor, which is on 2 satellites, the Terra satellite and the Aqua satellite, the VIIRS sensor, which is also on 2, and Landsat, which went up in 2013, and I took a big chunk of my startup funds and brought every student I had from either UMass Boston or BU to the launch, because the launch is pretty special. And I'm also a collaborator on the JEDI team, which doesn't launch pretty pictures so much, but it has a space-based LiDAR on it that's currently living on the space station and working very, very well. So I'm a member of these teams. They help fund me. And most of the first 3 collect data by going over the poles. They're like a ball of twine. They keep going over and over and over. It takes them about 99 minutes to make a circuit of the Earth. And so there's about 16 times they loop around the Earth every day, collecting these pretty pictures of the Earth so we can see what's going on. As I say, launches are, I have been more than blessed to now have attended 5 launches, which is more than any researcher. I thought when the first one went up in 1999, I was coming up on 40, and I thought, this is the absolute height of my career, as I watched the satellite that I worked on go up. And then I've just been very lucky to see these others go up too. Some are night launches, which is a little less, it's impressive, but as my irritating daughter said, because she got to go see them, she said, well, there's a big boom of sound and a big flash of light, and then you can't see much more. And I'm like, I hate you. Why do I take you to these things? But mercifully, Landsat 8 was a daylight launch, and we were able to bring some of the crew to that. And there's a new Landsat 9 coming up next year, and I hope to be able to bring people to that as well. So the primary research I make is albedo products for NASA and USGS, U.S. Geographical Services. And albedo is a measure of the Earth's reflectivity. It's how much of the sun's radiation comes down and gets bounced right back up to space. It's a function of what's on the land. Sand reflects a lot, snow reflects a lot. Forests gather in the radiation, get warmer and toastier. So the products that I use, they're global products. They're used in climate models, biogeochemical models, hydrologic models, and so they're used to monitor vegetation seasonality, crops, grazing, harvesting, snow extent, natural and human disturbances. And here I've got a picture of New England foliage. This is where, if you look at a bunch of my product month by month, you can see how the beautiful foliage of New England comes down from Canada and crosses into our area and then turns all brown. And then on the other side, I have a global albedo going from the very bright of Antarctica and up into the taiga and our northern reaches of Canada. We don't have a top. You can't see the top because this was taken in November, so it's polar darkness up there. If I don't have any radiation coming down from the sun, I can't get any pretty pictures. This is showing you how it changes over North America and Greenland throughout a year. This is 2018, and again, you can see when polar darkness, and then we fill up, and we got the reddish colors that are almost 190%-ish of the radiation is being reflected out when it's snow-covered, as opposed to down as we head into Florida and down into Mexico, where it's much lower value. If we focus on New England forests only reflect about 20% of the sun's radiation in the summer. It's closer to 60 when there's some snow on the ground, but because of our forests, our trees cover it somewhat, and you can see the variations. You can see how that could really change the radiation, the temperature, the climate, the weather, depending on what the surface is like. As I say, I work on these primary instruments. Landsat 8 is a 30-meter instrument. MODIS spews out products at 500 meters, which when you look at the picture of all of Massachusetts, you're like, yeah, okay, I can see the Quabbin, and yeah, it pretty much doesn't look that much different. But when we zoom in on us, on UMass Boston, our peninsula, you can see that the 30-meter, we can see the brighter colors over our new buildings and up at the Boston College buildings, which have a white roof. But when I look at 500 meters, you don't even really know it's a peninsula. So to get that real variation in the surface radiation, it's great to have these 30-meter satellites. Landsats have now been up for over 40 years, one after another. It's our longest term record, and so we're excited that there'll be a Landsat 9 and continue this record. All NASA and USGS instruments are free, all data are free to the world. The Europeans used to charge, but they've come on board and now their instruments are free to the world too, because the amount of research and monitoring and benefit for the countries has been deemed too extreme to like mess around with trying to charge $400 a scene or something stupid like that. I showed you North America. Angela, my current student, is working on circumpolar, and so you can really see how that's changing, and we're looking at that not just over a year, but back in time also to see how snow extent, tundra, things like that have changed. Angela's the only one of us who's done field work in Siberia, so she's got more chops than the rest of us put together. And we're pretty excited about some of these results for her dissertation. We do a lot of our field work out at Harvard Forest. It's a 4,000-acre experimental forest owned by Harvard University with the most astonishing facilities, beautiful colonial homes that have been converted to dorms complete with pillows and blankets and things. I love taking the UMass Boston kids to Harvard Forest and saying you will never be on a field site ever again that's quite like this one. But they have fabulous instrumentation. They're not only a long-term ecological research site, one of our oldest in the country, but they also are a NSF National Ecological Observatory Network. They have a tower there. They fly aircraft overhead, and we participate in those experiments. And it's a little over an hour from here, so it's our local field site. Down below, I just have some examples of, the top one is MODIS, MCD 43. The little orangey ones are more Harvard, and the little triangles are from Veers. So looking at how I'm doing compared to the albedo that I can see from this tall tower, pretty good. We do pretty good. We're pretty pleased with this. We're, obviously the tower is looking at a smaller footprint right underneath it, and we're looking at 500 meters, but we're quite confident when we look at these sorts of data that we're doing a pretty good job with our product. And we certainly appreciate all the support we've gotten from Harvard. They are astonishingly welcoming and cough up extending towers and facilities, which has been great. I also did my sabbatical there. One of the things that we do beyond making pretty pictures from satellites is we do a lot of LiDAR research. And we do that primarily at Harvard Forest using both terrestrial, airborne, and spaceborne LiDARs. It's an interesting site because, unfortunately, Harvard Forest is experiencing an invasive pest, the hemlock woolly adelgid. It's killing all the hemlocks along the East Coast. We probably will lose every one of them. It doesn't appear to be any way of stopping it, and it's moving up into Canada. They're tiny little critters that build a little cottony sac at the base of each and every needle, and they suck the sugars out of the needle, and then eventually the branches die, and then the whole tree. And I'm talking about hemlock trees that have diameters that you can hug, and it's really heartbreaking to watch these wonderful old trees keel over. We use some terrestrial LiDARs, one of which, the Compact Biomass LiDAR, that's its official name. It's really the cute baby LiDAR. We call it the CBL. But that doesn't go so well when you're submitting papers, so we had to come up with a more officially sounding name. But it was built in-house by our own research engineer, Francesco Perri, who is a fabulous engineer. And because he's a marine engineer, the thing is waterproof and all sorts of useful things. You'll see later why that's useful. Peter's work, who just defended on Friday, is taking terrestrial information and information from the two aircraft, a NASA aircraft and the Neon aircraft that overfly Harvard Forest periodically, often just because we ask them to. The NASA ones have been particularly good at going, oh, well, we're coming down from Maine. We could kind of dogleg and kind of lean on the button and get you some data. So he's been looking at that and comparing it to what we're going to see from the JEDI instrument, which lives on the space station. The data from JEDI has just been released in the last month, so we haven't got to see it for real, but Peter did a bunch of simulations and has got that paper ready to pretty much go out the door. So that's exciting. And as I say, up in the corner there's a picture of Francesco shoving this compact biomass LiDAR, which is absolutely indestructible, up on a pole through a tropical jungle. I take my students out in the field a lot, again, primarily on the LiDAR work, but these are some of the places that we've been since I've been at UMass Boston. Costa Rica and tropical forests, and more horrifyingly in mangroves. They told me the mangrove site was nice because it was a nice place to go kayaking because the alligators were considered small and not dangerous. I didn't put that on my form when I submitted the travel for that. We've also been in the San Joaquin grasslands of California, which was incredibly hot. Brisbane, Australia, and the eucalypts, which sadly those eucalypts in that picture have now been damaged. And of course, a lot of work at Harvard. There's the Bucky, the extending lift that Harvard has coughed up for us to use, which is quite exciting. And there's actually a picture of Eddie now as a vendor for Spectral Evolution, bringing some of their new toys out to play with us at Harvard Forest. We've also done work at Plum Island and the salt marshes there, another long-term ecological site. You can't really see it in this picture, but the people on either side of the creek there, the little CBL is dangling in between it on a zip line, and that's why Francesco made it waterproof. And we get scans of things like the edges of the salt marsh and how it's doing. We've also done salt marsh and soil cliff erosion work out at our own Nantucket field station there on the side. I'm going to end a little bit with it. Oh, there we go. When we have LiDAR, we take a bunch of pictures, particularly from the terrestrial one, on each side of a tree, and then we put them back together again to make a three-dimensional version of this tree. This is a rather famous tree. It's called the witness tree. The website is there. It tweets. It's instrumented. It has soil sensors at its base. It has sap sensors. It has all sorts of things. And a couple times a day, it talks to you about what's happening to it. It's become a real school, so much so that they've had to kind of make sure people don't go to try to find it because they'll smush all the instruments. It's a lovely old tree, and let's see, 180 years old. It's a good sized tree, and we're quite pleased. Peter went out and actually scanned this, so that was kind of fun to build a three-dimensional version of it, and that's on the website if you go with acknowledgement of UMass Boston. So that's kind of the really short, fast version of everything we do. Mostly I just try to bring money in. I'm not very useful anymore in the science or the coding or any of that good stuff. It's really my team. So the students, the researchers, the faculty for the School of the Environment, it's all them. I gotta be honest, it isn't particularly easy to do research at UMass Boston. It's difficult. So I particularly want to notice the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs. Matt Meyer and Shala come through for me over and over again, trying to manage these contracts, get them in from NASA, or I've had NASA, I've had USGS at the moment, I've had some NOAA in the past, and they always come through for me. Graduate studies at UMass Boston, Becky's always making sure my graduate students get paid, and Vala and Annette got the paperwork for Peter, so we're in good shape. He's going to graduate. I also have to mention UMass Boston IT. We're fortunate we have Jeff Dusenberry and Rukon Chen who work with us and also work closely with the Mass Green High Performance Computing Center. We do make use of that out at Holyoke because we have our algorithms aren't very difficult, but it's a lot of data. Global 30-meter data is a lot of data, so we're hefting a lot of data around, and we appreciate them. Apurva's always like dealing with my little crises, and his team, Andy, coming to keep our laptops going, and all of the IT and AV team. And as I say, thank you to Harvard Forest, who has been incredibly generous in supporting our work as well. And the funding from NASA and USGS, which is keeping this all going, and all of my colleagues on the various science teams that I'm a part of. And that's it. Should I take some questions, or? Yeah, anyone got anything they need to burningly want to ask me? Yeah.
Just one question, Professor Schaaf. Do you have to be a student in the school where the environment in order to go to one of the wonderful launches, or can you just be someone interested in doing a graphic novel about space travel?
Well, the Jedi one is at the Kennedy Space Center, so they're very good about making arrangements for just the general public. It's notified. I was fascinated. It was listed when I was in the hotel down there in Florida. It was listed when launch was and all this stuff. I was going, well, this is cool. So they're very good about opening. The other instruments all launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base in near Santa Barbara in California, so that's constrained, and it only is the one by invitation only, so they're harder. Although I will say that everyone in Santa Barbara knows when there's a launch, and they all go out and stand on the beach and watch the instrument go up. The first one that went up, Terra, the one I spent 10 years of my life, and there's my baby going up in the air, and they started the countdown, and they had to close it because some idiot was hang gliding in the launch space because he wanted to watch it go up. And there was this terse comment going, there's a hang glider in the launch space, we have to delay launch. The Air Force has activated fighter jets to escort him out of the area, and we're like, that must be exciting. And it did make it up that day. They restarted the launch. You have a fairly short launch window of less than an hour, so when something goes wrong, you're, So we did make it up, but unfortunately the public knows when they're going up, and sometimes that doesn't work so well.
Thank you.
Anything else? All righty, on to the next one, which requires triggering.
Thank you, Crystal. That was wonderful. So our next speaker is joining us by technology remotely from Sweden, where she's completing a Fulbright at Malmö University. This is Karen Suyemoto of the Psychology Department, who won the Distinguished Teaching Award.
Hi. Oh, people, yay. Greetings from Malmö. Hi. Okay. It is a little bit strange to be doing a talk where I can't see anybody. It's particularly strange for me to be doing a talk about my teaching when I can't see anybody, because for me, teaching has always been something that is very kind of relational and interactive. And so hopefully you'll kind of bear with me, because you can see me, but I can't see you. I want to talk a little bit about how I think about education and its purpose. And I kind of want to start with, let's see. Yes, I want to start with thank yous, because there are so many people that have supported my teaching, that have made me a better teacher, that have helped me believe in the kind of approach that I was using, that have supported me to do something different when, and trusted that I could do it well. And so many students that have taught me so much, that I just, that inspire me all the time. So I want to start actually with the question, what is the purpose of education? In my experience, these talks are usually mostly faculty or sometimes graduate students, so I'm kind of hoping I'm speaking to the right audience. But as a faculty, kind of considering the question, what is the purpose of education? There's a quote from John Dewey. The purpose of education is to give the young the things they need in order to develop in an orderly, sequential way into members of society. Any education is, in its forms and methods, an outgrowth of the needs of the society in which it exists. So there are different ways that you can interpret it. There's a large scholarship looking at this philosophically and critiquing it. But clearly, it relates education to the society in which it takes place. So one way that you might apply Dewey's ideas in relation to the society in which education takes place is in this proposed mission statement for a state educational system from 2015. The mission of the system is to develop human resources to meet the state's workforce needs, to discover and disseminate knowledge, and to develop in students heightened intellectual, cultural, and humane sensitivities, scientific procession, and technological expertise, and a sense of purpose. So reading this, it's like, well, I can see some, yeah. But everything has a context, and so a question I would have for you is, does it shift your thinking about this at all when you know that this is a quote from Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker about the mission of the University of Wisconsin? And does that change the way we think about it? And even more, does it affect how we think about this statement when we realize that this mission statement was a proposed change from this mission statement? That the mission of the system is to develop human resources to discover and disseminate knowledge, but also to extend knowledge and its application beyond the boundaries of the campuses to serve and stimulate society by developing in students heightened intellectual, cultural, and humane sensitivities, scientific procession, and technological expertise, and a sense of purpose. Inherent in this broad mission are methods of instruction, research, extended training, and public service designed to educate people and improve the human condition. Basic to every purpose of the system is the search for truth. So the purpose of education in our country may be shifting, and certainly shifting in ways that we might want to be paying attention to. So in 1948, Martin Luther King Jr. in an essay wrote that the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. But he went on to say, but education which stops with efficiency may prove the greatest menace to society. We must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. So the question then also becomes, what is character, or what is critical thinking? Because King talks about critical thinking in this essay as well. And Noam Chomsky makes a distinction between education for enlightenment, where the purpose is to teach students to question, to explore, to create, to learn from the past, and carry the quest for understanding further in their own way, versus education for indoctrination, which schools students and young people to fit into an established framework, to follow orders, to accept existing structures without challenge. And I think most higher education educators don't want to think that we may be practicing education for indoctrination. But I think that the research evidence in my field of psychology and in education suggests that if we are not really paying attention to it, that we are likely doing so. So what is the purpose of education? I start with this exploration of the question because I think it's imperative that we understand that education isn't objective and unbiased, and it's not uncultured, and it's not without a context, and it inherently relates to the society in which it takes place, and how we teach does that as well. And so as educators, we contribute to the influence of the social values or the social norms that are in our particular context in one way or another. There isn't a neutral option. So as educators, we make choices to reflect and reify, or to resist and challenge cultural biases and injustice within society and education. And this includes biases that have been conveyed by our own education and the socialization within our disciplines, and the socialization within a larger society that enacts biases and that socializes citizens into those biases, and that students bring to our classrooms. And so whatever we decide, whatever our choices are, has consequences. And those consequences are particularly impactful in a society or in a moment in time in a society where the society isn't meeting the ideals of equity and justice, where research and daily lived experience that our students bring to us or that we ourselves experience point to inequities related to social hierarchies such as race, gender, social class, sexual orientation, or disability. And we can't be neutral because the society socializes a particular aspect. If you look at developmental psych literature, you can see very clearly the way that we socialize children in particular kinds of biases to become adults that then enact implicit bias. And as a psychologist who studies the effects of these kinds of socialized inequities, I see the effects of educators' choices playing out. And playing out in the students and playing out in people more generally. And so what if we maintain the status quo? What happens? Like, what are the effects of our choices? And for students from diverse backgrounds who are occupying oppressed statuses, my research and the research of many other psychologists and educators suggests that the effects of oppression and maintaining that oppression through education include really strong psychological implications. So issues of silencing and depression and anxiety, as well as physical aspects of high blood pressure, risks for smoking and alcohol use, and internalized racism, self-denigration. So there's a whole range of psychological effects that are influenced by the choices we as educators make about maintaining or challenging the socialization. And there are educational and achievement effects also, the achievement gap, disengagement, disparities in income, advancement in leadership. But there are effects not only for oppressed students, but also for privileged students, that there is a distortion in the self-image and the worldview. There is a relational distancing, less authentic relationships, avoidance and lack of knowledge that comes because you have a much narrower view than you might have of the world and the experiences in it. But we can make different choices with different effects. And in my time at UMass, and particularly in the benefit of being in a joint appointment in clinical psychology, which is really oriented towards mental health and intervention and effects and well-being, with Asian American Studies and critical ethnic studies, which is really looking at the effects of oppression, of liberation, the possibilities within it. I have learned so much about my role as an educator and how I can be with students that affect how they are in the world. And so transformative education is really about the recognition of education as socialization. It's related to liberatory education, to Freire and the Hooks, and it's emancipatory education. It's really thinking about the ways in which education is a process of socialization that can help us see things that will affect the world in a positive way, or not. Some of the goals are very similar to goals of every type of education, indoctrination education and whatnot. So imparting content knowledge, developing critical thinking, imparting research or applied skills, preparing students to actually be able to survive in the world and support themselves and their families. Also developing organizational and collaborative skills, or soft skills. So some of the negative effects of not taking up the socialization aspects relate to students going out and not knowing how to interact with different kinds of people. But the kind of education I'm talking about also has other kinds of goals that offer language and analysis to name and validate things that are under-examined, but are really critical areas and approaches of analysis, and that make connections to lived experiences of students and empower them. And there are a lot of ways to teach through this approach. They can be small moments or ways of engaging students, specific content or assignments. One way is through action projects. And action projects are adding another aspect of enabling students to experience what it means to be empowered themselves to affect the world and to develop the skills through that process. And thereby actually having that effect. So utilizing the capacity of students within the classroom to produce initiatives that have impact on individual levels and on social levels and on advancing social justice. And so what I'm going to do right now is a little whirlwind introduction to several projects, mostly because the students' learning and the creativity and the impact that they have and the impact on them is really, for me, at the center of teaching. And because the kinds of projects that I do in my classes are projects that are structured to give students a scaffolding to develop their own ideas. So almost all of the projects that I am about to show you are projects that came from the students, that started with my saying, so you need to do a project. Here's the structure of how you do it. What do you want to do? One exception to that is this, which is a slide from a student presentation looking at research on the effects of Asian American studies on Asian American students themselves, where students were hearing from other students things like, I guess this class makes me feel more important. Because of my race, I'm no longer ashamed. Or things like, in this class, I learned that my parents really do love me. These are things that I hear that make me believe in my teaching in a very different kind of way. This is a project from students writing mass media articles on multiracial experiences and perspectives to educate their peers and the university community. This is a project that is a curriculum critique and development, where students develop recommendations for professors in their fields to diversify and teach through this lens more within different disciplines. This is the one that is being presented here is actually an economics course. This is a project where students organize other students to educate them about oppression and internalized oppression, and then put on a public arts interaction in the campus center. So this is the students doing that. This is a project where students took their understanding of multiraciality and race relations to the Boys and Girls Club of Boston, working a session with children based on the speeches with an activity. This is a project called Paint the School, where this group of students here developed flyers that they posted all around the campus based on interviews with students about their experiences of racism and how to interrupt racism. This is a project where students actually made recommendations, surveyed other students, and made recommendations that were then shared with faculty. You might have received this report about how Asian American students were experiencing marginalization or not being supported by professors and peers in the classroom. This is a doctoral student project aiming to support activists of color. It's a website to manage burnout. And this is another doctoral student project, most recently promoting procedural justice in research dissemination. What happens if you have done research that is not community-based? How can you still have some accountability to communities? So in my little whirlwind here, what I'm trying to convey is the great potential that students have to take the learning that we might give them and change the world. Because they have that drive and they have the vision and they see things that I don't see, and it's amazing. It's amazing. And it's, you can say, oh, it's easy to do in psychology, and that's somewhat true, and it's easy to do in critical ethnic studies, and that's somewhat true. But there are so many other areas that, climate change is a wonderful example that we can think about how education is more than facts and content. I want to end with a couple of student reflections. So what do students take from this? This is a student, Asian American student. As a student who used to be one of the many disregarded students receiving some kind of message to give up my future career because of my struggles with academic achievement and isolation, being recruited and counted on in this class, my efforts have been such empowerment for myself. I know that the past experience of silence makes me see the meaningful values of research and motivates me to enjoy working on our project. In this sense, our research on student needs has provided me opportunities to value my most hated and depressing experience. This is actually, I think, a student in the Paint the School project. Throughout the semester, I learned a lot of things I do on a daily basis that promote the dominance of white group and racism. After realizing how obvious I was to racism and its effects towards Asian Americans in particular, I wanted to help other people see what I saw. Participating in this project as a white person, many of the Asian American students were not willing to talk to me about race, and it upset me to realize how scared and alone they are. The division between the different races was crystal clear. I hope that through implementing our project, a small step toward equality will be taken. I want you to know that your class has changed my outlook on the world. The student said, I learned from doing this project the amount of power I hold and how just one project can cause awareness. It felt good to be able to educate people with the knowledge I found and provide some solution for the issue. Another student said, at the beginning of class, I viewed myself as more of a bystander on the whole issue of social change. Now I can see myself not only having a say in the matter, but possibly working with people in the future again to help better our surrounding environment and political situations. This is something I would never have thought possible before, and I'm very grateful for now seeing what I am capable of, as well as those around me. And then finally, my understanding of what activism was before the class was like Martin Luther King, people who acted in a movement to bring about change by organizing and going on strike. These were individual people who were leaders and led millions of people in a movement. And I don't think the word activist was ever really tangible for me because I did not ever believe I had any type of power. I felt so helpless because I felt so small compared to the huge institutions that racism is embedded into. I wanted desperately to have some type of way to change that. And this class changed that for me. I learned that even as one person, I could change things. So I want to return to this point. As educators, we make choices to reflect and reify, or to resist and challenge cultured and contextual biases and injustice within our society and within education. And so the question I would like to leave you with is, what kinds of choices will you make and what kinds of effects do you want to have? Because it's not something hugely exceptional to be able to bring out in students what already exists. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Can you hear me, Karen?
Yep.
Would
Yes.
you be able to take a question or two if anyone has any?
Sure, as long as you restate it, because it's hard for me to hear from the audience.
Okay. Anybody got a question? Yeah, Rajni.
Hi, Karen.
Hi, Rajni.
Could you tell us a little bit about how some of your ideas are being accepted or not in Sweden, where you're on a Fulbright? Because I assume you're kind of teaching there as well, in a way.
Did you hear
How
that?
some-
Did you
Did
hear
you
that,
think some of
Karen?
my ideas are being accepted or not in Sweden?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, with people.
Oh. So I actually just gave a talk here. So I find that students here are very receptive and interested, and I'm learning a lot from the different lenses that they're bringing, particularly around lenses that are around migration and citizenship, which are more dominant frames here. And they're also trying very hard to make sense of some of the racialization processes that are unfolding as this context becomes less homogenous and more visible, and differences become more visible. The faculty I find to be somewhat split in the reception. some being very open and excited, some feeling like there's common language, or that there are common concepts, and also that there is language that I am bringing and approaches to teaching that may be helpful. And some, there is a discourse here in Sweden that there is an official and institutionalized colorblindness. So there are some folks who are saying that basically talking about race and racialization, even as a social process, is racist or is invalid in this context. What I am struggling with is the fact that students, and particularly students of color or migrant students here, are so clear that that is not the case. And so I wonder about faculty who seem to be able to not hear those voices as if they don't exist. And I guess I would also say, I find it a little like being in the US, because I think that full range is something that I have experienced there as well, at home. So.
Thank you. Thanks, Karen. That was a great talk.
Thank you.
The Latin word facultas, from which the word faculty comes, means power and ability. And we've heard from a faculty member who's won an award for powering the university with her research. We've heard from one who's powered the university through her thoughtful and reflective teaching. And we're about to hear from one who powers the university by powering it, by actually helping it to run itself. There are a couple of deans in the audience. Deans and I, as provost, know that when you have to set up a committee, you'll always think of, whom can I nail to be on this committee? And I just have to say that for many, many years, I've thought first of Randy Albelda in many, many contexts, because she has been such a willing server on committees. So I'd love to hear what Randy has to say at this point in her career about service.
Thanks. Well, thank you all, and thanks for coming. I see lots of bits and pieces of places that I've spent a lot of time in. The Center for Social Policy, and Krista's back there from the Center for Women in Politics, and there's my MGS people, and my econ people. You know, Karen was talking about what Asian Americans learn from taking Asian American studies. What economics students learn when they take economics is they learn how to be greedy. All the studies show. So, thank you. And I mean, I'm tired from all the service that Emily and others have asked me to do. And sometimes I'm cranky, but I have to say, you know, with Crystal and with Karen and with all you, it's why there's no place like UMass Boston. Thank you. So now, serving a purpose. I had to come up with a title, and I had to come up with a pun, but and then I didn't put a subtitle, and it was going to be Reflections of a Socialist Feminist on service. But so instead, it's the same thing: Reflections on Production, Social Reproduction, and Resistance and Persistence in Academia. And I guess all of us, you know, I really appreciated, Crystal, that you started with your students and you ended with everybody else who helped make that research possible. All three of us benefited from the service from our departments for writing up these reports, which are a lot of work. So, and I know you served on the committee that picked some of them, so, so we all know service all too well. And in some ways, Karen set me up. So, what do universities do? And what do they produce? So here's the production part. I mean, simply they produce knowledge and ideas, and we heard some of that. And we also produced graduates, the teaching. In the context of today, and actually probably my entire teaching time, I mean, I guess if you're a socialist feminist, every context is contentious. But particularly now, in terms of unequal political, social, and economic spheres, universities are highly contested places. They're actually also somewhat under attack, at least fiscally. This means that public universities, particularly our own, that serve low-income students, immigrant or working class students, play an important role, but also a contradictory one. So do we produce ideas, this is what's, ideas, ideologies that challenge, or ones that support current economic, political, social hierarchies? And maybe being in the field of economics, it's particularly relevant, because I think a lot of economists do produce that knowledge and help reproduce it. And are we training students for what and for whom? And Karen set that up, and Crystal also answers her question in the way of what she produces her knowledge for. Then there's this question of social reproduction. And if you haven't read any socialist feminist work lately, social reproduction is this notion that no production takes place without reproduction. And reproductive labor, the work that goes into reproducing both people, but also entire systems, requires a lot of work, and it allows or it entails the ability for people to reproduce themselves, their families, their communities, on a daily basis. As we get up every morning, we go to work, or we take care of somebody, or maybe we don't. And also over time, and I guess you could call it just service, if you want. It also tends to be highly gendered work. When I told David I was going to talk about this, David Turkley says, "Oh, you're going to talk about how all the women do the work?" And I said, I was going to mention it because I come from a department, I had to mention it, but I have to give kudos to the economics department in that the work, the social reproduction of our work, of our department, has always been shared. And there's Arthur back there, there's David. We've had lots of men who do a lot of work, and we've got and we're grooming our men in our department to continue on that path. So I can't really make this about gender, because I have to say we've reproduced a department that has embodied the notion that women don't do all the work, and when we do, we let them know that we're doing it. But it's also not really measured. I mean, we count it, but it's really hard to count, and it's often invisible. What does social reproduction entail at universities? Well, it's obviously the reproduction of ideas and knowledge, and in that sense, it includes disciplinary and professional organs of knowledge, if you will, but many of us are keen on having our work heard and known. In our AFRs, I think we call that professional service, but journals, organizations, conferences, etc., that's a lot of work. It's also about the spread of ideas to the public. And I put in here making them common sense in the Gramscian sense, that is, that part of the reproduction of knowledge is getting that knowledge out and heard and discussed. And in that sense, those are our public service, if you will, on our AFRs. There's also the reproduction of the university as a place to produce graduates. And that work we all know really well. Like housework, some of it's drudgery. But it is the work that is required to produce graduates. As you can see, in neoliberal capitalism, there has been a construction of an academic industrial complex, which is part of, I guess, some of that service, or make work service. But again, to use this terminology at the shop floor, what it means for us as faculty is the work and the time it takes to hire, to review, to schedule classes, to advise, to mentor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Serve on Emily's committees, do an AQuad, it seems to be endless. But without that work, we don't work, or it doesn't work. So like the production of ideas, like the production of graduates, as Karen just nicely talked about, those being contested areas, so too, I think, is the service we perform. We perform them in the context of challenges, particularly at the public university, particularly at this public university. So as warriors in this contestation, it shapes the kind of research that we do, the things we teach, the way we teach. And what I'm going to try and make an argument here is it so too should shape our service. And that's what I mean by serving a purpose. That is, you're going to have to do your service. You might as well make it work for you and everybody else in reproducing the departments, the colleges, the university that you want, well, maybe it's that I want, really. But that we make it. So that it should be purposeful, but also strategic. And that's not so easy. I think the forces are against us. And in reflecting on this service I've been at UMass Boston for over 30 years, it seems that the purpose has been not as much to resist, but really to persist and to exist. I came here in the late 80s, and I don't remember a time when we weren't ever facing what seemed like a fiscal crisis. Sometimes we're better than others, but so in some ways, I think a lot of this social reproduction work has been to maintain and maybe to gain, but mostly to persist and our right to exist as this university, as this public university that serves a minority population in the city of Boston. So, like I said, serving a purpose is challenging. I guess that's a nice way to put it. But it also can be rewarding. A lot of it's drudgery, but you can make, if you have a sense of humor, you can also make some of it fun. It can be menial, and in some ways, sometimes it's career making. But it's also community building. If we do it right. So I'll talk a little bit about my purposes here at the university, and I end up being quite appreciative about being here at UMass Boston, because I think there are lots and lots of spaces to serve a purpose. Through service that can actually make a difference. So because of UMass Boston's history, its student body, its own faculty and staff's commitment to social and economic opportunity and justice, UMass Boston gives us many good reasons and opportunities to be purposeful. So I would say, even though the work of writing up distinguished blah, blah, blahs is nice, the most important work, I think, most important service work I think I've ever done here at UMass Boston is personnel work. And maybe that's, I want to make sure we reproduce ourselves as faculty. And so personnel work I see as our collective project of reproducing the kinds of people, faculty and staff that effectively produce what we produce, teach students well, do research that matters and challenges the common sense. And we do this through placing ourselves in, deciding who we hire and promote. And I'm reluctant to say this with Emily in the room, although you're only interim, so I think it'll be all right. That despite all the changes and actually the centralization of UMass Boston, it's true. It's been highly centralized at the top. The one thing that faculty still have a say over, and a strong say over, is who we hire. And so in that sense, and in departments where you fight over hiring, that could be a problem, but it allows us a space to hire the kinds of people that we think should be serving the purpose of the university. It also allows us, the personnel work allows us to keep who we think should be kept. So I think I've been on every personnel committee in my departments almost since I came here. Not quite. We're unusual. We have untenured faculty, tenure-track faculty serve on personnel committees in our department. So I've been serving on them for a long time. And like I said, I think it's the most important thing we do. In other service, the university service that I do, I actually stopped trying to do university service when I got really mad at some tenure case that 10 years ago. So I mostly do a lot of, I did. I was done. I mostly do university service in the college. I do some in McCormick. I do some in liberal arts. But in that service, I really do think that whether it's big or small, the idea of doing that is to reinforce and to make sure that we remember what our collective project is, and build our communities across departments, et cetera. So I think there are ways that, as onerous as some services, I think university services, I actually think it plays a purpose. And UMass Boston is more democratic than most places, but that means going to a lot of meetings. So democracy is meetings. But I'd say at the end of the day, it's worth it. In terms of professional service, I interviewed for a job at UMass Boston 4 times. The first was, I think, with you, Arthur, in a hotel room at one of the AA meetings, but you didn't hire me that time. The second time was, I think, for CPCS. I applied for a job there. A third time was for the College of Management. And the fourth time, they finally hired me. So I sort of wanted to be here. And I did manage it, and there was a good reason, because for progressive economists in the United States, there's probably no better home than UMass Boston. With our master's in economics, I think we're helping to carry on the work of the social reproduction of that. So I think doing professional service that reproduces, well, as I say here, economics is the disciplinary belly of the neoliberal beast. And so fighting for the reproduction of a whole variety of streams of progressive economic approaches is swimming against the tide. But it's actually really important work, because if we don't reproduce ourselves, there will be no resistance in economics. So my consistent and most time-consuming work has been with the International Association with Feminist Economics, which publishes a journal called Feminist Economics, And so for me, that's been the kind of work that I've put a lot of time in because I think it's important to have that. So I encourage you all to reproduce yourselves to the degree possible. The last one I want to talk is public service. And I say a part of UMass Boston highly values and encourages faculty to enhance its urban mission. I sometimes think we speak from both ends of our mouth or both sides of our mouth on that. But there's still some truth to the fact that there is a recognition and an acknowledgement and appreciation for us as faculty to engage publicly with our work. And like I said, I think, if you look on the website, it's called public engagement. Oftentimes I hear it and I'm being accused of being an advocate. But here's your quote. I know some of the people in the room know where this quote comes from. Philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. What? You know who that is? Yes. Okay. Do you want to tell them? They don't all know. Yes, it is. It is Marx. So, and in some ways that's praxis, right? I mean, the idea is we produce knowledge, we teach, and Karen talked about changing our students. I feel really fortunate to be able to have taken my research and actually learned how to do some of my research or what to research on low-income women in the United States by working with state, local, national, and sometimes international groups on issues affecting low-income women, and gotten rewarded for that. I would say that the areas I've worked in, and I think my research or framing or participation in discussions about have made a difference, include welfare reform, although that was a complete bust. I guess I'm not good at that one. But these cliff effects that we worked with at the Center for Social Policy on this really difficult issue of particularly single mothers earning more but losing all their public supports and really getting nowhere. I did a work actually a while ago with Lee Badgett on lesbian, gay, and bisexual and transgender poverty, which actually had a lot of legs. I didn't continue with it, but Lee did. And I guess the most recent, and actually the thing I'm most proudest of is the work that I did with Alan Clayton Matthews, who used to be on this campus on paid family medical leave, that we did estimates for the state, and I worked with groups for well over a decade on that, and we actually have a bill, although it's not perfect. So like others, I'm incredibly grateful to my department, to my CLA colleagues, the dean, for seeing this work as worthwhile and important, and as a way to do public service. And I know in many places it's not. So serve a purpose. And again, usually I'm a little bit more biting and critical and cranky, but in thinking about getting being able to do this, but also getting a distinguished award to do it, makes me exceptionally grateful. So, thank you. Questions on doing service? Does anyone, you're probably not that good at it, right? No questions. Oh, go ahead, Francoise.
So how do you get the message to new hires about the campus?
About this? Well, I think it's easy. It's easy. They have to do university service, or they won't get tenure. So it's easy to get them to do that. What I try to do is have them think through what they would like to do that actually might make a difference for them. And in some ways, my advice is do some service where you're going to meet interesting people across the campus, so you build a community. The professional service, I think, is also easier because that pays off. You get reviewed on service, and professional service is one of those. So I think, people review a lot, and you don't really have to do that. I think it's the public service that is the harder one. Because, well, there's lots of barriers. One is, how do you do it? Who do you work with? How do you find those people? And the other is, it's not typically that well rewarded unless you're going to publish something out of it. So it's, and it especially if you work with underrepresented groups or low-income groups, it's not seen as engagement. It's often seen as advocacy. I think it's a little different here at UMass Boston because these are our students, right? But in other places, so that's a little bit hard. Actually, Lee Badgett wrote a great book called Public Professor. But I think that one's a little bit harder sell. But it pays off, I have to say, it pays off. I didn't think to do work on the cliff effects until I remember I was sitting in a meeting with childcare workers. And the woman who ran the childcare, this must have been 15 or 18 years ago, she ran the childcare center. And she said she was having a lot of trouble hiring people because when she hired them and paid them, they were losing their food stamps and other stuff. And that was sort of, that's how I learned to think about what does that mean? How do you think about that? So it's, and I think you can publish more than I did from this stuff. So I actually think you can do it, and have it be counted in the ways that we care about, like tenure, that kind of things. Yeah. So yeah, Kiki.
Why do women faculty at UMass Boston have more service? And how does it affect their abilities to get beyond a tenured assistant professor
Yeah.
and become distinguished professors?
Well, I mean, I think the answer to that is they do it. They're used to doing it. They do it in their organizations. They do it at home. They do it. So I think it's part of that sexual division of labor at work. And like I said, I think I feel lucky to have been in a department where the men do work and have done work. And I don't know if that's because they hired a bunch of feminists and didn't want to be shamed, or they're just good guys. But it does. I mean, there's research on this that it affects particularly the promotion from associate to full. So I don't know what to say. I still think it's important work, some of it, and I think we should do it. Although I think we all should do it, and I'm not sure how to get other departments to be as good as my department. Maybe we should give workshops in the economics department about how we make the men work.
Economists who do field work.
What?
Economists who do field
Yeah, economists who do field work. Yeah. So, but I mean, I don't. I think it's all part and parcel of that division of labor that just gets reproduced until we intervene. So, yeah.
This isn't a question, but I
Comment.
think in some ways your talk has been a form of an answer to Kiki's question if it were pursued further, because in a way that I haven't heard quite so clearly before, you theorized, especially theorized service at the university today in a way that makes it a true partner with research and teaching in terms of production.
Yeah.
And can't recall that being done before in such a lucid and forceful way. And I think if we followed that line of thinking, it could be part of an argument for this third piece of our shared work to be truly shared.
Yeah, I mean, Crystal mentioned, her last page was all about that reproductive work that is the edifice in which she's able to do her research. I mean, and usually people don't do that. They don't list that. They don't say that. So, yeah, David.
Back to your question, the comments you were making about the public service and what counts, particularly in tenure cases. So would you advocate for something that better weighed, for example, the white paper you write about cliff effects versus publishing that in a journal? How should PTCs, deans be thinking about that?
Well, we fight about that in our department, actually, in our own DPC. I advocate that it should be under research. Some other people want to put it under service. And the way we usually resolve it is we say, well, what do they need more of? Although, I mean, you do want a little bit of consistency for that stuff. I don't know how we better, I mean, and you're absolutely right. I mean, it's really hard to disentangle for me research, teaching, and service. It just really is. But we have to do it on our AFRs. And CPCs and deans and provosts have to, are you excellent in this? Are you excellent in this? Are you excellent in this? And so that's why our solution is more pragmatic. Where do you need it? Where do you need to boost your case to be seen as a person that should be on this faculty as a tenured faculty? I'm not the pro at this. Other people may have other ways in which they've done this in their departments. Or David, you're a dean too. You might have thoughts on how we do this, Emily. Or there is a fine line. I mean, in some ways, we are really lucky because anywhere else, the stuff that I do would be seen as advocacy, and it would be dismissed, not even just counted and not rewarded. It would be, in effect, sort of like, why, you're doing advocacy, as opposed to consulting with the World Bank, which would be public engagement. But I do think, that's why I said one part of UMass Boston does value that. And I think we have to, push to make that be valued and to be counted. But it's really hard to count our service work. And some people do service badly, right? I mean, that's the other technique. Put me on a committee and I won't do anything. You don't want that person on that committee again. So I mean, that's why in my, I'm trying to give a pitch for thinking about it as being purposeful, not only for yourself and your daily reproduction and wanting to come back to work, but for the project as a whole. So.
Thank you very much for being here, all of you. I think it's been a wonderful way to highlight some of the power of the university. I thank our 2 speakers in person and our 1 speaker on Skype for inspiring talks, and I hope everybody will stay and share some refreshments and ask more questions as that seems appropriate to you. Thank you again.